Hi everyone, I hope you're okay on this rainy Tuesday. Thank you to everyone who sent me some lovely messages yesterday. I'm feeling so much better. I think yesterday I was just super tired, having to carry around this big baby all the time. So now baby is apparently about the size of a pumpkin. So imagine having to carry a pumpkin around with you all day, every day. So that's why Miss Jones was just feeling a bit tired yesterday. So sorry we missed our story time. Today I've got a story that hopefully will make up for it. It's one of my favourites called Paddington. Some of you have probably heard of it before or seen the films. I know it's a bit of a rubbish day today because it's raining lots, but for those of you who have been planting, I know my garden is very happy to have the rain because it hasn't seen any for ages, and the water is going to help all of those beautiful plants that you've grown and help your garden lots. So even though it's a bit rubbish and we can't necessarily go out and enjoy lots of sunshine, it's needed, isn't it? So I've got Paddington. It's written by Michael Bond. It's one of my favourite stories from when I was a little girl, so hopefully you enjoy it too. There we go. Mr. and Mrs. Brown first met Paddington on a railway platform. In fact, that was how he came to have such an unusual name for a bear, because Paddington was the name of the station. The Browns were waiting to meet their daughter Judy when Mr. Brown noticed something small and furry near the left luggage office. "It looks like a bear," he said. "A bear?" repeated Mrs. Brown. "On Paddington Station? Don't be silly, Henry, there can't be." There he is. But Mr. Brown was right. It was sitting on an old leather suitcase marked "Wanted on Voyage," and as they drew near it stood up and politely raised its hat. "Good afternoon," it said. "May I help you?" "It's very kind of you," said Mr. Brown, "but as a matter of fact we were wondering if we could help you." "You're a very small bear," said Mrs. Brown. "Where are you from?" The bear looked around carefully before replying. "Darkest Peru. I'm not really supposed to be here at all. I'm a stowaway." "You don't mean to say you've come all the way from South America on your own?" exclaimed Mrs. Brown. "Whatever did you do for food?" Unlocking the suitcase, the bear took out an almost empty glass jar. "I ate marmalade," he said. Bears like marmalade. Mrs. Brown looked at the label around the bear's neck. "Please look after this bear." "Thank you," it said quite simply. "Oh, Henry," she cried, "we can't leave him here all by himself. There's no knowing what might happen to him. Can't he come home and stay with us?" "Stay with us?" repeated Mr. Brown nervously. He looked down at the bear. Would you like that?" he asked. "That is," he added hastily, "if you have nothing else planned." "Oh, yes," replied the bear. "I would like that very much. I've nowhere to go, and everyone seems in such a hurry. I know when I've been to Paddington Station in London, everyone is in a hurry. It's a very busy station." "That settles it," said Mrs. Brown. "Now you must be thirsty after your journey. Mr. Brown can get you some tea while I go and meet our daughter Judy." "But Mary," said Mr. Brown, "we don't even know its name." Mrs. Brown thought for a moment. "I know," she said. "We'll call him Paddington after the station." "Paddington!" The bear tested it several times to make sure. "It sounds very important." Mr. Brown tried it out next. "Follow me, Paddington," he said. "I'll take you to the snack bar." Mr. Brown was as good as his word. Paddington had never seen so many snacks on one tray, and he didn't know which to try first. Oh goodness, look at all of those cakes. They look delicious. He was so hungry and thirsty, he climbed up on the table to get a better look. Mr. Brown turned away, pretending he had tea with a bear on Paddington Station every day of his life. I wonder if other people think they look a bit funny. "Henry," cried Mrs. Brown when she arrived with Judy, "what are you doing to that poor bear?" Paddington jumped up to raise his hat, and in his haste he trod on a strawberry tart, skidded on the cream, and fell backwards into his cup of tea. Oh, goodness. Oh, and look, he's covered in cake. "I think we'd better go out before anything else happens," said Mr. Brown. Judy took hold of Paddington's paw. "Come along," she said. "We'll take you home and you can meet Mrs. Bird and my brother Jonathan." Mr. Brown led the way to a waiting taxi. "Number 32 Windsor Gardens, please," he said. The driver stared at Paddington. "Bears is extra," he growled. "Sticky Bears is twice as much, and make sure none of it comes off on my interior. That was clean when I set out this morning." The interior is the inside of his car, like his seats. Doesn't seem very happy about that. The sun was shining as they drove out of the station, and there were cars and big red buses everywhere. Paddington waved to some people waiting at a bus stop, and several of them waved back. It was all very friendly. Paddington tapped the taxi driver on his shoulder. "It isn't a bit like darkest Peru," he announced. The man jumped at the sound of Paddington's voice. "Cream," he said bitterly. "Cream and jam all over me coat." He slid the little window behind him shut. "Oh dear," Henry murmured Mrs. Brown. "I wonder if we're doing the right thing." Fortunately, before anyone had time to answer, they arrived at Windsor Gardens, and Judy helped Paddington onto the pavement. "Now you're going to meet Mrs. Bird," she said. "She looks after us. She's a bit fierce at times, but she doesn't really mean it. I'm sure you'll like her." Paddington felt his knees begin to wobble. "I'm sure I shall if you say so," he replied. "The thing is, will she like me?" There she is at the window. "Goodness gracious!" exclaimed Mrs. Bird. "What have you got there?" "It's not a what," said Judy. "It's a bear called Paddington, and he's coming to stay with us." "A bear?" said Mrs. Bird, as Paddington raised his hat. "Well, he has good manners, I'll say that for him." "I'm afraid I stepped on a jam tart by mistake," said Paddington. "I can see that," said Mrs. Bird. "You'd better have a bath before you're very much older. Judy can turn it on for you. I dare say you'll be wanting some marmalade too." "I think she likes you," whispered Judy. Paddington had never been in a bathroom before, and while the water was running, he made himself at home. First of all, he tried writing his new name in steam on the mirror. Then he used Mr. Brown's shaving foam to draw a map of Peru on the floor. Oh, goodness. It wasn't until a drip landed on his head that he remembered what he was supposed to be doing. He soon discovered that getting into a bath is one thing, but it's quite another matter getting out again, especially when it's full of soapy water. Looks like he's having lots of fun in the bath there. And he's left his hat on. Paddington tried calling out, "Help!" At first a quiet voice so as not to disturb anyone, then very loudly, "Help! Help!" When that didn't work, he began bailing the water out with his hat. But the hat had several holes in it, and his map of Peru soon turned into a sea of foam. Oh no! Suddenly, Jonathan and Judy burst into the bathroom and lifted a dripping Paddington onto the floor. "Thank goodness you're all right," cried Judy. "We heard you calling out." "Fancy making such a mess," said Jonathan admiringly. "You should have pulled the plug out." "Oh," said Paddington, "I never thought of that." When Paddington came downstairs, he looked so clean no one could possibly be cross with him. His fur was all soft and silky, his nose gleamed, and his paws had lost all the traces of jam and cream. Oh, it looks lovely and clean there. The Browns made room for him in a small armchair, and Mrs. Bird brought him a pot of tea and a plate of hot buttered toast and marmalade. We know how much he likes marmalade. Now, said Mrs. Brown, you must tell us all about yourself. I'm sure you must have had lots of adventures. I have, said Paddington earnestly. Things are always happening to me. I'm that sort of a bear. He settled back in the armchair. I was brought up by my Aunt Lucy in darkest Peru, he began. But she had to go into a home for retired bears in Lima. He closed his eyes thoughtfully, and a hush fell over the room as everyone waited expectantly. After a while, when nothing happened, they began to get restless. Mr. Brown tried coughing. Then he reached across and poked Paddington. Well, I never, he said. I do believe he's fast asleep. After all that's happened to him, Mrs. Brown said, is it any wonder? There he is, fast asleep on the sofa. I hope you enjoyed that story. I know the film is much longer and there's much more information in there. It goes on lots more adventures. And I will hopefully see you again another day this week to share another story. Have a lovely day. Bye, everyone.